another way. When you got the Titanic and they filled it with too many people, what happened? It sunk. And that's what's happening to England. We're sinking. Too many.
Welcome back to the Mind Over Matter podcast. We're your hosts, Fatima Rajavili and
Fatima Zaidi. As you may have guessed from the title and audio, today's episode will address the rise of anti-immigrant and Islamophobic rhetoric following the recent incidents of far-right violence. So, what on earth is going on right now?
So, because this conversation is so closely linked to politics, let's get into it by first understanding the political spectrum. If each political party in the UK rests somewhere along the spectrum, wherever they rest reflects their views regarding things like migration, taxation, and essentially the role that they think the government should play in supporting its citizens. So on one end we have left-wing ideas which generally support state intervention, meaning that the government should play an active role in supporting its people. As I said, each position on this spectrum influences approaches to welfare and things like that. So why is this relevant? You guys may have seen recently the Southport incident in which the horrific stabbing and killing of 3 very young children at a dance workshop took place. And sadly, in a time where communities should have been coming together to support the bereaved families, we saw an eruption of violence, rioting, looting, and hate towards people of colour, immigrants, but also Muslims. So I guess the question is, why?
Before the attacker's identity was revealed, a false rumor was spread that it was committed by a Muslim immigrant. I think they even made up the name Ali al-Shakati, right?
Yeah.
The police initially withheld the name of the true attacker, but even after being identified as a British-born Christian, the public expressed outrage with the political system, claiming they've had enough, and migration has gone too far, and we need to stop the boats and stop the immigrants from killing our children. This led to organized riots by far-right individuals, but it wasn't just, protests. It was them going as far as burning down hotels and small businesses and committing stabbings and acid attacks.
Yeah, and unfortunately, far-right terrorism has been on the rise for quite some time. But, so I guess this can be attributed to ethnic nationalism, which is the idea that the white majority is entitled to preserve itself and prevent the mixing of ethnicities. So that's why they have to assert their racial superiority. But Fatima, you'll be better equipped to answer this. What is the psyche of the EDL?
I think it's a clear case of a victim complex, which is characterized by blaming others for our suffering, feeling or thinking that the world is against you, and relishing in feeling bad about yourself. And I think that last symptom is really interesting because some of the videos I'm seeing, I don't know if you've noticed, but the rioters seem really happy in causing the destruction that they're causing, smiling while setting buildings alight, despite supposedly being upset. And so studies find that perpetrators of hate crimes often adopt this mindset, believing themselves to be wronged by a society, and as a result needing someone to blame and scapegoat. In this case, minorities such as Muslims and immigrants for their own perceived grievances.
Yeah, but also I think it's so important to recognize that this doesn't just come out of nowhere. Like, the media has such a strong influence on public perception because we have this group of people that's constantly dehumanized or painted as something to fear. So then it's not surprising that violence is on the rise. So I think the media plays a really significant role in normalizing racism. Even if you look at tabloids like The Sun and shows like I'm a Celebrity, that literally had Nigel Farage, leader of the Reform Party, on there. And I think having a political leader like that on reality TV attempts to present him as someone who's like relatable and likable, and that's just really concerning considering his very open disdain for Muslims, and all that's done is just boosted his popularity.
Yeah, I remember when studying A-level politics, likability really affected what people thought of a politician as opposed to what they actually endorse. For example, a study showed how people vote using the pub test, which is, does the politician seem like which is the idea that does the politician seem like they'd be a good laugh on a night out.
But even movies, like, they're not much better. They also have a lot of these kind of tropes. For example, like Aladdin, I remember studying this in university, uses a lot of Orientalist tropes that portrays Arab men as barbaric, and again, that's just reinforcing that negative stereotyping, right? Then there's that line at the start of I think it's the opening of the movie where it says, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so essentially, like, it's just describing people from these cultural backgrounds as uncivil.
Yeah, I think in the scene in Aladdin where he's stealing like an apple or something, the guy says, "I will cut your hand," and that is supposed to be reflective of the law of the land.
Exactly. And these are just like little things that you wouldn't think is an issue, but I feel like it's slowly normalizing it in people's minds.
Totally. Like subliminal messaging, basically.
Yeah.
What's also important is to look at the historical context and its repercussions. Hate crimes against Asians have been occurring since the 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah.
Paki bashing was supposed to be Britain's favorite pastime during this time. It was, I believe, at some point within this time, 31 brown people were killed in racially motivated killings. And the media didn't point out how bad this was. Instead, they fueled the fire to the idea of the Asian invasion. And there's a major irony behind the statement, "Go back to your own country," because we didn't come to Britain. Britain came to us. Colonization played a huge role in the migration of South Asians.
Yeah, exactly. And the current wave of anti-immigrant sentiment is not just a product of economic uncertainty, but also a continuation of this historical pattern of scapegoating minorities during times of national anxiety. So we see the role of politics, but what can Islamic history tell us about the current state?
If we analyze the workings of the political system, we can kind of see what has led to this. This isn't something new. In the 26th surah of the Quran, verse 34, there's the story of Banu Israel, which begins with Pharaoh's story and how he manipulates his own people to destroy them. We're given the indication that the army of Pharaoh isn't limited to physical war machines. Obviously, in that time, that was swords and chariots. In present day, things like drones and fighter jets are used. But the Quran suggests that they use something even more powerful than this. Pharaoh's right-hand man was a person known as Haman.
So, for people who aren't familiar with the story, do you want to just explain a little bit more who Haman was?
Just to keep it simple, Haman was a minister that he employed. But obviously the question still remains, Pharaoh's one man and Haman is one man. So how did they keep an entire population under their thought? It was through the role of cascading from the top to the ministerial ranks, such as, Haman, who we just mentioned, then to the propagandists and journalist class, who then downstreamed their ideologies into the masses.
Yeah, so what you're trying to say is journalism isn't exactly free thought.
Yeah, because I think that same system of cascading is still used today.
Yeah.
And so what they're presenting to us isn't what they believe, but what, has been fed to them from the top. The second thing that Pharaoh employed was this us versus them situation, which we can see, modern day Nigel Farage is doing in the name of British values. Pharaoh used scare tactics when Prophet Musa rose. He said, "Musa wants to turn you out of this land with his magic. I want my people to be free." And this whole dialogue is in the Quran, but of course.
Yeah, so we know that Pharaoh didn't actually mean any of it, and rather it was just used as a scare tactic to, I guess, contain anyone who tried to defy him.
Exactly, because he's the ones that literally kept them imprisoned, and literally had them working in chains. So, all because they didn't believe that he was God. So obviously we can see how this us versus them situation, the fear and division, are, tried and tested tactics within the fabric of political power, both in the past and the present.
Yeah, I think especially your point about fear and division, we can draw a lot of parallels to that today. I don't know if you saw the Good Morning Britain interview with Zara Sultana.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
so bad.
She was talking about the far-right incidents that have been happening, and she rightly said that we should call them out as Islamophobic, but the presenters kind of just denied it. Whether that's something they genuinely believe, or they just, I don't know, don't want to call it out. All it's doing is just adding to that culture of apathy and denial.
And yeah, exactly. And it's downplaying the nature of the attacks against the Muslims and the migrants by avoiding those terms that should be used to, describe it.
Pretty much.
And then another argument we've been seeing a lot is whether or not immigrants are positively contributing to society. We have a lot of people who say that immigrants are actually a drain on the fiscal system, but in reality, since the early 2000s, immigrants have made net contributions to public finances. So this reality contrasts starkly with the view that's often presented in public debate.
I mean, if we look at the stats, only 0.18% of the population in this country are refugees. There are over 1 million people in the country with no recourse to public funds, and those who do access them receive about £37.50 a week. Who costs the British public more? These people who are desperate for help, or billionaires like Rupert Murdoch, who hasn't paid corporate tax for 11 years? As Zara Sultana pointed out, the real enemies are those using private jets, not migrant dinghies.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also a lot of irony in the far right's actions. So, for example, we see people claiming that immigrants are taking our jobs, but then they're also criticizing them for...
I've heard that too.
I don't know how that works. There's a specific video that I have in mind of that guy being like, these immigrants, they're taking our jobs, but then they're not working.
And then the interviewer is like, so how are they taking your job and also staying at home doing nothing? And then he's like,
they just do it.
They just do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jokes aside, though, the worst thing is destroying small businesses and, food takeaways. If you truly care about the working class, you wouldn't be destroying independent businesses, looting fresh food in this manner.
Yeah.
I think this violence is an emotional outlet for them to express their disappointment in the country, escaping from the bleak and blandness of life. And I think hating is just so much easier because anger spreads, and now they found something to blame. They can use that to feel like victims again. Government isn't looking out for the working class. It never did. But your enemies aren't the migrants.
Yes.
It's those who have enabled living in this way, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and the middleman is stuck in between.
100%. Like, I do think the government is flawed, and there are valid reasons for people to be upset, but your anger is misplaced towards the wrong people.
To the wrong people, yeah.
If there's anything we should be protesting or campaigning for, it should be reducing poverty, reducing knife crime, these kind of things, instead of just using migrants as a scapegoat.
Yeah. Since we're on the topic of jokes, I think a lot of jokes are also about, the lack of GCSEs in terms of the protesters having them, because we can tell from their responses they're not using common sense. But I think there is, I don't know if I'm going to get cancelled for this, but I think there is some truth to it. When you lack education, you're unable to identify biases. I think what's also important, aside from actual education, is the lack of emotional intelligence too. It's really easy to manipulate individuals who lack any sense of awareness or care for anyone but themselves. And if you tell them the reason why you're unhappy is because of immigrants, they'll eat that up. They'll jump on the blame bandwagon.
Yeah.
And this is why, although it's shocking that they can commit such heinous acts like setting buildings aflame, stabbing people, or, acid attacks, it's because they no longer see people of color as humans.
Yeah. I know that some people listening to this podcast might think that there hasn't been that much of an impact following the riots, but actually a recent consensus showed that amongst around 1,500 people, 92% of Muslims said that they feel much less safe living in the UK following the riots. And I mean, we can talk about our personal experience here.
Yeah, we had to cancel our trip to London. We were going to film an episode on grief, but we had to cancel it. So we're like, okay, maybe this might not be the best.
Exactly. And then we heard about acid
right
attacks happening. So we were like, okay, it's better to be safe than sorry. And it's not just us, like many people didn't leave their house for days.
I think us recording this podcast, I think this is it's been a week and a bit later. This is like the second time I'm leaving the house.
Exactly. But also, it showed that 1 in 6 Muslims have experienced a racist incident following the UK riots. Just some closing remarks. We have learned that the media outlets are definitely guilty of downplaying attacks against Muslims and migrants. By avoiding accurate terms, they contribute to a culture of denial and apathy. So, throughout this, I think our most powerful tool is conversation, recognizing the importance of language so that such attacks are rightly called out as Islamophobic, and then only then can we tackle the root cause. And as I said, it's no surprise that the media we consume is biased, right? So we must think before spreading misinformation.
Totally. And I think another important thing to address is the positive things we've been seeing about immigrants, such as I wouldn't be alive right now if it wasn't for my brown doctor, or someone saying I attained 9 GCSEs, so I'll be positively contributing to the economy. I think here we can raise the question, should we only care about immigrants when they're useful to us?
That's such an interesting question, and yeah, I agree. I've been seeing a lot of rhetoric about this online, and whilst it's really impressive if you have all these achievements, and it's true that as migrants we do contribute a lot to this economy, especially in the healthcare system, in STEM sort of careers, all of these things, and that's amazing. But we shouldn't be striving to, I guess, almost prove our worth.
Yeah.
Because we deserve to be here just as much as anyone else. And so it's a classist argument, and so I don't even think we should be entertaining that.
We should be recognizing the humanity in every person rather than their worth through what they've achieved.
Exactly, because what happens if you're a migrant who didn't do so well at school, or you come from unfortunate circumstances? Does that mean if you get attacked, it's justified?
Yeah.
No.
Exactly.
So in conclusion, Islamophobia is definitely on the rise, so our advice to you is, if you're a Muslim or a person of colour, please stay safe and informed about any planned protests in your area. There have also been suggestions of counter-protests in retaliation, and while I can understand that, I understand the sentiment, right? You feel like you have to step in and do something. I wouldn't advise anyone to go to such counter-protests just because violence can so quickly escalate. So, I think just stay safe and try to avoid them.
And the Quran also states, do not let the hatred of a people prevent you from being just. In essence, saying that don't counter hate with hate.
Exactly.
Although this is a time where we feel low, it's crucial to understand that these actions reflect the ignorance and fear of the perpetrators, not the worth or identity of those targeted.
Absolutely.
So maintain hope that justice will prevail and there is still good in humanity.
Yeah, I hope that you guys feel like you learned something from this episode and you found it beneficial. And I think that's all from us this week.
Yeah.
Not this week, I think that's all from us.
Thank you for listening,
Thank you for listening. Bye.